Deflection. Deflection is the amount of movement a panel or architectural feature can have due to force. Any force. Based on their properties, all materials have a certain amount of allowance for deflection. And depending on where a feature is placed, there are ways to avoid unwanted movement in a panel. Is the feature placed in a high-traffic area where it is bumped more frequently? Or is it more of a decorative piece placed away from all the action? Asking the right questions will provide the right material, gauge, and hardware solutions to support your vision. To test the effects of deflection force, we apply 25 pounds of pressure center of panel in each hardware type. This is done in 3 commonly used space conditions: floor to ceiling, cantilevered, and desktop. Floor to ceiling. Each floor to ceiling test will include a 3/8 inch gauge varia panel at 4 by 8 feet in measurement. Let's start with our top support and suspend hardware. Top support hardware measures around 2 inches of panel deflection when applying 25 pounds of pressure to the panel's center. Suspend hardware has around 1.5 inches of panel deflection when applying the same amount of pressure. Depending on the space conditions, this may be the acceptable amount of deflection. While both of these tests show panel movement, they could still withstand common use and abuse in built environments, like the weight of someone's body. Now we'll test Versa, Frame, and L2O. Because of the many more points of support of this hardware, we see a massive reduction in deflection when applying 25 pounds of pressure. Versa hardware shows around 3/4 of an inch of panel deflection. L2O hardware at around 5/8 of an inch of panel deflection. And Frame hardware at around 3/4 of an inch of panel deflection. If something like top support hardware is preferred, top support with bracing shows better resistance and may fit within the overall aesthetic. Keep in mind that the rigidity of an installation also depends greatly on the gauge of the material. So if we were to increase the gauge of the resin panel, we would see even better deflection results within each hardware. Cantilevered. Many wide open space conditions call on cantilever designs for space division. So here, we put our L2O and Versa hardware versions to the test. Versa cantilevered hardware with a 3/8 inch gauge varia panel will show 1.1/8 inch of panel deflection when applying 25 pounds of force. With L2O cantilevered hardware, we see around 5/8 of an inch of panel deflection with the same amount of force. For reference, here's our floor-to-ceiling L2O system and our cantilevered L2O system at around the same measurement of deflection. When thinking about all the possible interactions with a desktop feature, the height of the panel plays an important role. Even with hardware that is minimal by design, deflection might not be an issue depending on the space. Here we have our desk partition front model, which comes standard with a 1/4 inch gauge resin panel at a height of 24 inches. We test it with 25 pounds of pressure and see up to 5 inches of panel deflection. When we put our desk partition U model to the test with the same gauge and height measurements, you see a greater resistance to deflection force, around 2.25 inches. This is because of the extra points of support and the U-shape of the panel. When it's absolutely necessary to minimize the panel movement in a feature, there are different hardware aesthetics to choose from that vary in panel height to hardware length. We'll test our privacy screen, Versa privacy partition, as well as our fin hardware at their standard specifications. Privacy screen shows a panel deflection of 1 5/8 inches at these specifications. Here is a Versa privacy partition showing a 1/4 inch of panel deflection at these specifications. If your design calls for thicker gauges with different material properties, Here's an example of a 1-inch gauge chroma panel with thin hardware. As you can see with the 1-inch gauge chroma, we have a very rigid partition showing around 3/8 of an inch of panel deflection. If your design calls for thinner gauges of the same material, like 1/2-inch chroma, you would see an increase in deflection. But with a small alteration in fin hardware, a 1/2-inch gauge chroma panel withstands nearly the same deflection. So, what is the acceptable amount of deflection for your installation? Whatever the concept, 3form's experienced materials consultants can help you through these considerations in the specification process. Additionally, we have a team of highly skilled project coordinators and tech estimators to make sure your spec is exactly right. And 3form has a certified installer program for guaranteed install quotes and a seamless install experience every time.